guys. We are here with Dr. Jenny Borda of Built by Borda fame. Jenny, let's do just a quick rundown. I don't think anybody doesn't know you that might listen to this, but hopefully people will spread it around.
Oh yeah, I hope this is something people want to share with people outside of the friendship/Built by Borda network. So
I love it.
My name is Jenny Borda. I have my doctorate in physical therapy. I grew up in Ohio. I grew up in Dayton, so just a little bit away from Columbus, in a gymnastics family. Both of my parents were coaches, and I did gymnastics growing up. Took a little bit of time away from gymnastics in like middle school, early high school, because I had a lot of fears about going backwards, a lot of mental blocks. That was really stressful for me. So I took a little time away and did ballet, went back to gymnastics and did very well. Ended up walking on Ohio State's team, and it was just it was an unhealthy atmosphere for me. I don't know if it was for everyone. It just was not what I was set up for, I think. A lot of different reasons. But I ended up stopping doing gymnastics, starting coaching, gymnastics that is, and coached for many years. During that process of coaching, I graduated college with a communications degree. I coached full-time for 2 years, decided I wanted to go to physical therapy school because I just, one, had a lot of injuries, and two, as a coach, was seeing all of these girls hurt all the time and not really having good answers. And I thought, man, that would be really great to be able to help athletes like this. So went to PT school with the goal of helping younger athletes be healthier and recover better for sport. So went to PT school at Ohio State also. So both of my degrees are from Ohio State. Go Bucks. And then while I was in PT school, I still coached gymnastics. When I got my first PT job, I still coached gymnastics. So I worked like 65, 70 hours a week. I hit a point that I think I just was like, man, I do nothing for myself. I just ate fast food for every meal, just not taking care of myself. And I was active. I would do things with the girls. I was in the gym, but I didn't have a regular workout routine, anything like that. And during that time, I had a handful of friends that were competing in CrossFit. And I thought, I think I could do that. And I made a decision. It was really when I turned 31. I thought, you know what? I need to do something different with my life. I can get a different job. I could not coach gymnastics. I could get a different PT job. I could move to another city. And I looked at all of those options. And in that time, I kind of started going to Urban Active at the time, working out more, making more of my own food, just in general, taking better care of myself. And what it came down to is I did interview for a couple different PT jobs. But I think what I felt most comfortable with was I think it's time to stop coaching, which I loved. So it was really sad, but I didn't go to school for 8 years to coach gymnastics. Right. So stopped coaching, came to Friendship with the intention of competing in CrossFit. I think that was really, one, yes, I need to do more for myself, but I think some of that was, I want to have some goals. I think I could be good at this. Came with the intention of competing. And really then the last, 12 years now, that's all kind of snowballed into more things, right? Competed pretty successfully, slowly walked away from my clinic PT job during that time to focus more on competing, but also then I was helping people here. I was coaching a little bit at the gym, started seeing some adults on the side, had a major shoulder surgery, which was devastating. You could go back and listen to a podcast full of tears that I send to plenty of athletes that have big injuries because I think it's helpful to hear, like, you're not alone when you're, my career essentially ended competitively with an injury or a big surgery. And from there, at the time, I would have said there's zero silver linings, but a ton, right? I decided at that point to, I really got into we had a new house, decorating my house, looked into some new hobbies that weren't fitness related, which was super healthy for me. I had been on Depo for 20 years, so we can get into that more in the podcast, but decided not to do that anymore because in the chance that we wanted to have kids, there were people that said, oh my gosh, you could take 2 years. So I was like, okay, right. I should stop being on birth control. But got pregnant without expecting it. So, had Vivi and started my own business all in the same, really, I left my clinic job and found out I was pregnant within 1 week of each other.
COVID to at the end of 2021 was fast and furious for Jenny Borda.
Very, very, yeah. I think that I've had a couple really big times in my life that I felt like, wow, I have to do something different. And then it happens very fast, as long as you're willing to let those things happen. But yeah, I decided to leave my clinic job, which was I did not hate it. I liked the people I treated. I liked my coworkers. I didn't like not having autonomy. I didn't like that in that setting, it was too hard to really have relationships with athletes and families and work on prevention, which I was pretty passionate about at that point. So, you know, it was a hard decision to leave and scary, very scary to go on my own because you're leaving. I mean, essentially, think about it. I left my job. A week later, I found out I was pregnant. And I was like, I literally just walked away from full pay after having a baby. But it still was the best decision. Never for 1 second have I regretted that decision. And so, yeah, very, very busy from COVID to kind of starting Built by Borda because so many people were looking for help while they weren't training to, you know, leaving my clinic job, really starting Built by Borda full time, having a baby, and a lot of big change and all of it extremely positive.
And now, like, tell me just a little bit about like your client population, who you specifically work with, and kind of what you do that you would maybe talk about being a little bit of maybe like a blend of what you do at Friendship and a blend of what you do at Built by Borda, like kind of how you help the girls in that way.
Yeah, so I still like to coach some classes at Friendship. I really enjoy my 425 people. Not that I wouldn't like another class, but I have a pretty good, consistent group of people.
You've been coaching that time frame for, I mean, at least 5 years.
Yeah, for a long
if not
time.
more.
Yeah, I have a really consistent group of people that come, and I really enjoy it. And if you're listening and you're like, oh, I'm not that consistent, still come.
Yeah.
We're very welcoming, I promise. But I like to coach adults. I like to work with people who have goals, and the goal can be anything, right? But I think a performance goal is really powerful. I think if you're going to work out and you have nothing you're working toward, it becomes very monotonous. And it's great to do it for health, but if you can put a metric to, then what is that health marker or what is that performance marker? I enjoy that when someone is very goal driven. So I still do a little bit of adult coaching. You know, I still really like competitive CrossFit. So if there's someone who's interested in doing local comps or they would have an aspiration of doing more, even if it was just the realm of a little gymnastics training or technique work, I really enjoy those things, those higher level things. So I do that. And then my patient population for Built by Borda is really an athletic population. So I see adults, mostly from the gym. Sometimes I will get adults from outside of the gym, referrals, parents of kids I've seen. Yeah. So, you know, it's very orthopedic, but very sports oriented. So for the most part, getting people back to being active, any activity. I wouldn't say I only see one sport or activity, but I'm very heavy in gymnasts and adult functional fitness. So my main population, probably 80% of what I see are gymnasts, normally 13 to that 22 age range. I do have some college athletes. I have some other female athletes. So I have, you know, a great soccer player right now. I've had a handful of soccer players in the past.
Don't forget your boy.
I do have boys. I've had some really great male athletes right now. I have a wrestler. Shout out to Huggy if he listens. That's my most consistent patient. I really enjoy athletes, especially athletes who are driven to reach goals, help them get back. And I think that was a space that a lot of times is missing in clinical physical therapy, is that bridge between, I'm a big believer in the basics. I think a lot of PT even doesn't do great with the basics. Like you got to do a leg raise and a toe tap and a scap retraction sometime, right? You got to do these super basic laying on the table exercises occasionally, because when you're an athlete and you're having pain, even if it's not a big injury, you are doing all these functional things and you're having pain. So we probably need to take some steps back and build from the very beginning, right? You probably aren't using all the muscles you need to properly. So we need to relearn that. But then I think there's a big gap between that and, you know, going and full sprinting or hurdling or vaulting or swinging bars or wrestling. So it's how can I take those basics and then slowly layer them on to allow your body to tolerate these really high level things. And I think another place that PT is lacking, clinic PT typically, is that really high level stuff.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and that's stuff that we've talked about, like when you were getting rolling with Built by Borda, that for me was the biggest gap that I was seeing in adult population specifically, but also with kids, was there wasn't anything from like, okay, PTN. So like a traditional is, you know, you get surgery or, you know, you get, you know, diagnosed to PT. And so you get 8 weeks or 6 weeks, and that's what insurance will cover. And so you go to Children's and you go in once a week and you go to the clinic and you do your PT. And then like that ends. And a lot of times when these end, there's not like this big, like, graduation meeting where we talk about what's next, right? There's not like this, like, oh, let's sit down. Okay, you've done great this 8 weeks. Here's what I want. I want you to go home and keep doing these PT exercises for another 4 weeks. And then you would do this and then this and then this. And you build out like a plan that would get them back to full performance. A lot of times it's just like, cool, see ya. And we get so many people from an adult perspective that are like, one of our questions during intake is, do you have any, injuries or anything we need to know about? And they're like, yeah, I shattered my ankle and I tore my Achilles. And I'm always like, cool, tell me about the rehab. And they're like, oh yeah, I kind of went to like Ortho 1 for like 6 weeks. I'm like, is that it? And they're like, yep. And I'm like, and how's it feel now? They're like, oh, it's terrible. Like, and you're just like, okay, so we were missing what's next there, and we are going to have to address that, right? It's not like you can just ignore it and it'll just magically start getting better. So that was one of the biggest areas and gaps that I saw, and that's what I think your skill set is so cool. And I love, there are some other physical therapists that we know that have done competitive CrossFit or powerlifting or played professional sports, and so a lot of them had similar things where they had an injury, they can point to it that ended a career maybe, or challenged them in some way, and they saw that in their rehab something was missing. And I think that that's just super powerful. I think it takes what a physical therapist can do just up to such a higher level. So I think it's just so cool that you've built that. And I think the girls maybe sort of realize what they're getting.
They do. I think they do.
I think 10 years from now is when they're actually really going to realize.
Yeah,
how good it is.
I had a girl the other day who I said, if this were, back when I worked in the clinic, I would discharge you, right? You're back to full gymnastics. You know what you're supposed to do. If you want to be done coming. Yeah. Like I don't ever tell someone they have to come. But what almost everyone chooses to do is continue on a semi-regular basis. And then we get to work on prevention, or we get to work on performance. Like, right. What are you struggling with in the gym? How can I help you with that? If something is nagging, you have a visit. And so most people get back to 100% and then never leave, which is not the goal of physical therapy.
Right.
So that isn't physical therapy anymore. Could I have done something? I mean, there were plenty of people that when I worked in the clinic that I feel like used, I have 40 PT visits and the PT was fine using all 40. And my answer to that was always, but that's not what this insurance-based therapy is for anymore. And that's a piece of why insurance is so messed up,
right.
Is that we're using it for things that it's not intended for. And is this the best arena to do that? And is it true physical therapy, or is it wellness? Is it personal training? Right. There's such a blend of that I think that's what we miss out on, right? We could see someone for a long time, and I think it's extremely beneficial for all people to have a movement specialist that
right.
they can talk to about things, but it's not always that. I don't think the clinic model is appropriate for that necessarily.
Yeah. Well, and I know we wanted to talk today specifically more about young women,
yes.
Development. We're still in Women's Month, and we focused a lot of our stuff, maybe more on moms, parents, older women, some of those things. But I think our goal for today, we have 2 young daughters
Yep.
between us, and you work, like we've talked about, with a lot of young women.
And have for a long time.
Yeah, and have for a long time, and span and age range, and what I would say is the most pivotal, transformative time where having strong, smart, powerful women in their lives is super important.
Yeah.
So, I guess I kind of want to just throw it to you, and just in kind of terms of, where you want to start and what you feel like, do you want to start all the way down with Stevie and Vivi, and then work our way up, or kind of what's your goal?
Yeah, I think in wanting to talk about this, a big piece of it was I have, a ton of experience being a female, being one my whole life.
Yep.
Also, I did a sport that was very aesthetically based in the 80s and 90s, and we did not lift weights in gymnastics. And I have said the phrase many times in my life, like, oh, I can't lift more than 2 or 3 pounds. I don't want to get bulky. I build really bulky muscle. Like I did not grow up in an unhealthy environment. So I think that's a big piece of it is I see so many relationships between mothers and daughters. And you said most of this month we've talked about moms. And I think this blends perfectly because these girls that I work with, they will be moms. And if we don't take care of it when they're younger, then some of the issues that we're discussing today don't ever improve because you have these body image issues and you have these beliefs about fitness and weightlifting, and then you become an adult and then you have a kid and then you talk poorly about your body and then your daughter hears that and you tell them not to lift weights. So it's very cyclical. So what we talk about today, I hope a lot of moms listen to and think like, oh my goodness, like not to call anyone out, but it just happens. That's what you're a little bit ingrained in doing that. That's been your life. It's probably how you were raised. So, I grew up in a really, I would say, positive environment. I remember going to Moore's Nautilus with my mom and I'd go to the kids area and she would work out. Yeah. We had all kinds of food in our house. Like I never remember being told I wasn't allowed to eat something. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think truly a healthy environment that I felt like there were no off-limit foods. I understood fruits. We always had fruit. We always had vegetables. But if I wanted to eat chips, I ate chips. So I really think growing up, I was very lucky that I didn't have a lot of food issues. I remember being around some girls I did gymnastics with and wanting to run through like McDonald's and then be like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe you would eat that. And I just thought like, man, I don't know. Have you had a double cheeseburger? They're pretty delicious. And just that thought of like, that was a healthier perspective. Was that, am I saying going and eating double cheeseburgers is the healthiest thing for your body all the time? No, but I didn't do that all the time. But it's probably less healthy if you think all you can eat is your salad. And, that isn't true health either, right? There's a lot of different markers of health. And some of it is your beliefs on things and feeling too restricted. Or, I read a post the other day with Halloween coming that said, having an eating disorder is far less healthy than eating some candy. Yeah. So, just those thoughts of how do you develop? Like, do you feel better when you eat a lot of fruits and vegetables? Yes. So you said we could start with Stevie and Vivi. So we can talk about that. I think, some of the things, so Vivi is my daughter and Stevie is Jeff's daughter and they're a year apart. So Vivian right now is 3.5. Stevie's 2.5. And so, like I said, I had a pretty healthy environment. I think I have a pretty good mindset about stuff in general, but I still really do occasionally have to think about things. And I think even more so with Keith. Like I think he struggles a little bit more with the food piece of it. Mm-hmm. Probably one, because I do a little more research on it. But just yes, I made this dinner, and you have to eat some protein, so you're going to eat this. Mm-hmm. Instead of trying really hard to say okay, what do these foods do for our body? Like on our plate, we have cheese, and that helps make your bones strong. And we have this turkey, and that helps make your muscles strong. Yep. And we have these carrots, and that helps you see better. Yeah. And talking about what do all these foods do. And then sometimes if she doesn't want to eat something, I would say in general, she doesn't really like ground meat. So if we have ground meat, she probably doesn't really want to eat it. And just realizing we can put it on our plate because exposure is good, right? Give her the option. But then okay, if you don't want to eat this, we still have to have something that makes our muscles strong. So would you rather have some turkey or a yogurt? Mm-hmm. Right? So now she got some choices in her food. Yep. We're teaching her to make choices. Right. We're teaching her why we make those choices. Instead of just well, you have to eat this or you can't get up from the table or you won't eat dinner tonight. Which in that way doesn't really teach anything about eating, right? You only learned I have to eat something I don't want to eat. Kids on their own are extremely intuitive with
that's
eating.
What I was just going to say. I mean, that's been the most mind-blowing thing for me. And I think where Maria and I have been very different is I'm totally cool if Stevie just is I don't want to eat right now. And I'm just she'll and sometimes, and where it freaks Maria out is there's been days, whole days where she'll eat almost nothing. Maria's oh my gosh, what's, and then, but of course then, the next day, then it's oh, she's going to have, ask for 3 eggs, and then she's going to have a full banana and a plate of blueberries and raspberries and, 3 rice cakes. And, she's going to have rice and chicken with dinner. And you start looking at that and you're adding it up. And there's been days where I'm so impressed by her eating. I'll put it into my my nutrition app. And I'll look at her, I'll be she ate 2,300 calories today. Mm-hmm. And so, I always just kind of think, like you said, it's intuitive. It's fun for me to see that because I think that that's very natural. And I think we almost train our bodies, train ourselves, train our minds that no, it's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And it's it's got to be at these times and it's got to be this amount and all this stuff. And it's just I've started to look at Stevie more of over a week and just let her guide it a little bit more. So.
I look at some kids dietitians who talk about how people in general are intuitive with nutrition, right? And we beat that out of them
Yeah.
as kids because
Yeah.
you make them eat certain things and you make them try stuff and you make them finish, or you don't let them have another cookie. And that's something that I think about. Like, I totally get it, how it's hard to sometimes be like, oh, she shouldn't really have more ice cream. But at the same time, if she asks for more ice cream, 95% of the time I give it to her and she takes 2 bites and
Yeah,
she doesn't want any more.
Right.
So what did she learn from that? She learned to trust her hunger. She learned to trust what she wanted to eat. And so if you don't do that and you never give the ice cream and suddenly, or the extra ice cream, and she's 5 or 6 and she gets more ice cream, is she going to finish it just because she knows she's not going to get more later? And so I think that's a piece of it is you can make decisions, and we're going to talk about why we eat these things. And sometimes things aren't options. Like right now, like chocolate balls just aren't an option because that's not what we're eating right now. But I think that's been something I've thought about a lot. And, like I said, I don't love to read research articles, but I do frequently try to just see like what new research is out there, either on the patient population I see. Now that I have a little girl, I look some things up more. Like there is research studies that show that 4 and 5-year-olds comment on their body.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, 4 and 5. They'll look in a mirror and they'll say like, oh, I'm fat today, or things like that, which is so messed up if you think about it. And where did they learn that? Like they didn't learn that. They're not scrolling on Instagram. They might be watching some TV shows, but they learned that from whatever their parent or their main role model that they're around, their grandma, their whoever. And that's just a natural thing, right? You put an outfit on, you don't feel good in it, right? As an adult, and you say like, oh, I look so fat, right? I look so fat, or ugh, like, so you say those things, and then you have this little person who's so moldable learning, and they look at their caregiver and think like, oh, well, then maybe I look fat. And I think like, gosh, because that's just a random comment you'd make, right? Like, it doesn't mean you are fat. It doesn't mean it means like, this is how I feel. And so I try really hard to pretty much like never say things like that, which it does take effort to not comment on negative things about your body. But
yeah, and I think some of that stuff too is even, when you start, I think everybody's going to deal with that maybe at some point, whether it's at 4 or 5, which is maybe an extreme case, or if it's more in their teenage years or more in their college years. I think the key point of what I try to communicate a lot, especially with Maria, is, let's say she says that, and then you can just communicate back, and that's okay. And you're fine if you feel that way, that's fine. If you are, like, let's say you are a little bit overweight, that's fine, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Is that something that we want to work on? And then you ask them the question, right? And if they say no, then okay, cool, right? If they say yes, then okay, cool. Like, let's work on it. Would you like to learn how to not feel that way? And I think at the end of the day, like, the more than anything, what we're really focused on, especially with young women, is the communication of hard lines of like, that is not okay. This is not okay. Like, even saying or feeling these things, or even, I think a lot of young women, when they're in their teenage years into college years, I think like you were talking about, I know when I went to college, I knew, like, I did not know almost anything about eating, right? And like what you were saying, like I was running to fast food and, I was doing this, like, I think everybody goes through that a little bit of like, okay, I'm sourcing my own food for a lot of people for the first time in their lives. And I think this goes back to like, one of the things, we always bring Stevie grocery shopping as much as we possibly can. And we try to have her be really involved. She cooks with us a lot. We're trying to have her always be like, you're cutting something with us, right? And she's got her own like cutting tools. And so, eventually, like when she's a little bit older, I really want her to be like, hey, you're responsible for the sweet potatoes tonight, like you're responsible for this. And so she knows how to, go through that whole process of, we went to the grocery, we bought it because we were planning on making it for dinner tonight. This is how you can prepare a sweet potato, one of 3 or 4 different ways. And which way would you like it tonight? Do you want it baked? Do you want fries? Do you want waffle fries? Like, what do you want, right? And involving them in that process, so that then that kind of leads you to that conversation later, where if we are, going to fast food a lot, like we at least have the knowledge base in our back, and we have a communication base in our back of our minds, in our history, to attack that when you're ready for it. And I think that's the biggest thing, is kind of like whenever you're ready for it. So I think it's, the worrisome thing for me a lot of times, and we've talked about this with gymnasts, and I mean, I know you've got some super messed up stories for things that like coaches have said, and things that are not specifically from parents, but just cultures that exist in sports, and I think some sports are obviously worse on this than others. Gymnastics or diving or things that maybe have a little bit more of an aesthetic component to it. But I think that's something that I don't remember a lot of at all in guys athletics, and I think that that's one of those things. Like, I mean, Maria and I are talking a lot about like, hey, what activities, what sports are we going to get Stevie into? And I'd get worried. I mean, if I'm honest, I get worried about gymnastics because of that. And I know that you've already got Vivian in gymnastics, so I know like you're working on making sure you put her in good cultures. But I'm just interested on kind of how you're thinking about that, and then more than anything, how you're working in Built by Borda to change that culture.
Yeah. So I think that, I mean, that's a really popular question for gymnasts, or like, oh, would you let your kid do gymnastics? And I would say that's a very polarizing. A lot of people are like, no, never. Like a lot of the gymnasts I still ask today, who I think are doing really well, they come and they lift weights with me, they work out, they are healthy. Like I really do feel like they themselves are doing well. They'll be like, no. I'm like, why do you think that? Like, what makes you, like, you love this sport and you're doing it? And I think it's just, gymnastics culture still has a ways to go in being truly healthy. And some places have it figured out really well. And some places have, a long distance to still travel in being a healthier culture. And I think in sports like that, one, you're subjectively judged, and you're judged on how you look, not your body type, but you're judged on how you perform things and how your body looks doing it, as opposed to soccer, you kick a ball into a goal, right, or football or things like that. So I think that you're always going to have that little piece of it. And so I think the hard part is coaches, you kind of mentioned that. I mean, I can think of many examples of coaches, and they're doing it because their knowledge base isn't broad enough, right? They're stuck in, 90s, maybe even 80s coaching mentality of, you want to be the tiny 14-year-old. And that is changing, right? We just saw the Olympics and we had all these 20-year-olds and we had some 30-year-olds, which is amazing.
Well, and I also think too, I mean, and not to interrupt, I think that you're seeing, Simone Biles, Natalie Raisman, like you get some females that are not the Nastia Lukin, where they're really tall and really lean, those more traditional, like Romanian gymnasts, right, that were super tiny. I think you're starting to see now that powerful gymnastics, strength and power gymnastics actually is like you watch Simone Biles vault and you're like, oh my God, like that's amazing.
And if you're really strong and sturdy, you're going to have better longevity.
Yeah.
And, I always tell people that so I'll go over, we're talking about coaches saying things. I'll go over a couple things. So, I have a coach that tells girls that want to come to lift, like, okay, just make sure you don't get bulky, which is like, I've said it, it's the biggest myth in women lifting, right? So like, man, if you want to be bulky or you think you're going to get bulky, you got to work to be bulky. You know how hard it was for me to put on more muscle mass?
Let's go through Jenny's journey of this.
Yeah, it's hard. Like it is hard to be bulky. And for the most part, you think about these people that are, really lean or very strong or very muscular, because I think bulky to me is large. Yeah. But really we're just talking about putting on some muscle mass, which essentially you're just going to look leaner or more toned. You might get a little bit bigger, but for the most part, when you put a sweatshirt on, you're going to look teeny tiny still. Yeah. But I don't want you to get bulky. Some comments about like, you need to do more stretching and less strength work. And yes, being flexible is important for gymnasts. I think, my mindset about stretching has changed so much and that's something that women forever have. You need to do cardio and stretch. And I don't know. I think, when I stopped doing gymnastics, I 100% was like, oh, okay, I'll just spend 45 minutes on the elliptical every day and I'll do a Pilates class. And listen, I think Pilates is great. I loved Pilates. I was Pilates certified. I went through all of these things to learn more about Pilates. But I think that is the best way to truly have like a strong body and feel empowered and understand what it feels like to be strong. My answer would be no to that. I think, really a mix of things is probably the healthiest, right? I can do a little Pilates and I do learn to lift weights. Like I didn't learn about lifting weights until my 30s. And I mean, it was so empowering. I would go back into the gym like in my 30s and be able to do every skill on bars I could do when I was a teenager training gymnastics all the time. And that was my wake up call in, wow, like being truly physically strong is the most powerful thing I can do for being good at my sport. Yeah. It isn't just, a million hours. And I think that's what I run into right now is, we don't have time to weightlift, right? So my summer lifting program that I run through Friendship is all girls. So it's teen girls 13 and up, is pretty popular. Then we get to the school year and it's not as popular because you have school and then you have to be at practice. And it's not just gymnasts. Like I like other athletes to come in also, but everyone's just a little busier that the strength training component takes a back seat because we have games or we are getting ready for gymnastics meets. So like that piece of our sport has to be the most important. Mm-hmm. And I don't disagree that it needs to be important when you're getting ready for a competition season, but that doesn't mean that being physically strong isn't important anymore. It's extremely important. So I hate that the strength training component for lots of sports, not just gymnastics, starts to take a back seat, which is sad because that's when we see more overuse injuries. That's when we see performance difficulties, right? So you're going to strength train less through your entire competitive season, whatever sport you're playing. Less strength training. You're going to get to the end of your season, which for pretty much every sport is the most important part of the season, and you're going to be your weakest. Yep. And that just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I can understand occasionally like backing off. We don't necessarily want to be sore during your competition season. Should you be trying 1 rep maxes all the time or no? But the goal would be to preserve the strength that you've gained in your off season. And I think that a lot of sports, especially for women, aren't good at looking at that. I was thinking about saying how I didn't weightlift until my 30s. I remember having somewhat of an interest in it in high school. And I was just thinking about this the other day, thinking about the podcast. And our high school was really cool. You got to take your gym classes were 4.5 weeks, so half a quarter. And you got to pick different sports, right? So I did like flag football 1, flag football 2, tennis 1, tennis 2. We had some tumbling ones, but it did weightlifting. And I just remember that it was me and one other girl.
Say probably all guys, yeah.
Yeah. And so that probably even set it up for, a little bit of like, oh, like, do I want to do this? Because listen, our most high school boys, the nicest, not really. Boys are boys a lot of times.
And probably not in that, environment or culture.
In that environment, yeah. And so that's hard. Like, could that have pivoted something majorly for me in this and the teacher of that class was a woman. But it's like that didn't make it better either, which is kind of crazy. It almost seemed like she just wanted to teach boys, which is kind of sad, right? I mean, I think that that's one thing that outside of, having a mom who I truly do think is great, I can't name one female role model that I really would have looked up to through those formative years. Yeah. And not that I am oh my gosh, I really missed out on something, but I do think that would have made a difference, right? I think your mom can only do so much for you. Yeah. Having a great mom is awesome. Yeah. And not everyone has a great mom, right. But you're going to look up to I didn't have a lot of female coaches. Most of them were men. And I think that would have made a big difference. So for me, that's something I care so much about is being a place that can encourage these younger female athletes to be able to be honest about things, to feel like they can try new things and not feel embarrassed and realize there's a learning curve to, weightlifting and strength training and all those things, to get them to understand, you shouldn't be stretching more. I don't want you to be disrespectful to your coach, but at the same time, I want you to realize that being physically strong will make you better at everything. There's zero negative to being strong. Right. And so just trying to give some factual information. That's hard when you're combating someone they spend 25 hours a week with. Right. There's coaches around also that give...
Well, and influence too.
Oh, a lot of influence. You care.
Success
listen.
For scholarships and opportunities and all that stuff.
Listen, if you ask, why don't you don't want to miss this to go do this thing with your friends, or this hurts. This is a big one, right? You're in pain. You keep pushing through it. You're not performing very well because your body isn't doing well. Why don't you speak up? I don't want my coach to be mad. What's your coach? So I ask coaches that sometimes. I don't think they really are mad. Right. I don't. I truly don't. But I think their reaction to things is negative. Okay, I guess we just won't do that today. So then kids feel bad about that and they don't want to speak up. And then there's plenty of coaches. I'm sure I thought this in my 20s sometimes when something hurt, oh, does it really hurt or are they faking? And guess what? Yeah. It actually doesn't matter if they're faking, right? It matters whatever the reason. Do they not like gymnastics? Are they scared of the skill?
Do they need a mental break?
Do they need a mental break? All of those things are actually important. And so, okay, I get it. If they aren't going to do their skills, they can't compete. I don't disagree with that. But you don't have to say it in a way like, well, if you don't do this and you don't. You have to say things like, listen, I really care about your health first and foremost.
Right.
We're going to be better at gymnastics if we're feeling better. So I'm just letting you know if we aren't able to do our series on beam this week, we probably aren't going to be able to do the meet, but that's okay with me.
Yeah.
Instead, I remember last year I had a girl whose toe was really hurting. And I was like, it's early in the season, it's January. Like, I just don't think you should do some of these things at the meet. She's like, well, they really want me to do all around. Okay, why? Like, she's like, well, I don't know. And I said, okay, well, how does vault feel? She's like, well, I'm just going to do an easier vault. Okay, well, what part of the vault hurts? Running. Okay, well, when you do your easier vault, don't you still have to run? Yeah. Okay. Like, just trying to get them to think through it. Like, yeah. I've had coaches say like, not love me because they think I overstep sometimes. And I never want to overstep. Like, the coach is extremely important. I always tell kids, like, you need to respect your coach. You need to be respectful. You need to ask questions. But at the same time, you always have to do what's best for you.
Yeah, I was going to say, advocate for yourself.
Yes. And if
you're advocating for that athlete in a way that the coach may or may not be.
And so, the point from some coaches are like, you should reach out to us and talk to us. Well, if I have 8 kids, am I going to spend all that time? And when I reach out, are you going to respond? Or are you going to get mad that the kid talked to me? Because that happens sometimes. Right. The coach is mad then that the kid talked to me about an issue. Mm-hmm. So then I'm setting up this whole, like, I don't want to just go talk to you about what the kid talked to me about, but I want the kid to learn that she needs to go talk about it. Yeah. The problem is that a lot of girls then will feel more comfortable. And listen, if I have to get thrown under the bus, I get thrown under the bus. Right. But they'll go back and say, well, Jenny said, instead of saying their feelings, right? Which that's what they need to learn to do. They need to learn to say, I am not comfortable. And this is in any realm, right? This is really hard for girls in general.
This is super scary for anybody.
Scary.
Yeah.
So this is the thing I say is, if you cannot speak up to your coach or your teacher in something you think you haven't been treated well, or a friend, or in any aspect we're talking about, what happens when they're in college and then they're in a scenario that is dangerous? It's dangerous physically, or it's dangerous emotionally. Like, this is actually what we're learning. We're not just learning to be like a great athlete or do gymnastics. We're learning like how to take care of ourselves and how to be healthy and how to be strong and how to not put ourselves in dangerous situations. And that is actually what we're learning when we're young and we're playing sports and we're going to school and we have authority figures. An authority figure isn't supposed to, I mean, it is easy, right? Having a toddler, it is so easy to see how that gets squashed, right? Because man, that's annoying when you when you ask me a million questions, or you're not moving faster, you're not doing what I ask. Or if I say, hey, do you want to? Like, I will say, do you want? Because I want them to do that. And if Vivi says no, my answer then has to be like, okay, because I asked if she wanted to. Right. You don't ask people if they want to do things and then not take their answer. Right. But that is something that happens all the time. Like, you don't ask someone a question and only want the answer you want. And so that's something, man, I've thought so much about, is how easy it is to like beat submission into these, and probably more little girls. I do think it happens more. Like, be polite, smile, like lots of these little things that I do think little girls get treated differently than little boys. And it's important for boys too. So obviously, but one, it's Women's Month, but two, I do think it's different for women. And I think that when you're a 12-year-old and you have a gymnastics coach that's your authority figure and they never share things with your parents, so your parents don't really know what's going on, and you feel like you're disappointing them and you don't want to let people down and you don't want to get in trouble and you really want to be good at gymnastics, you're going to do whatever you're told to do. And it's such an important thing to learn that I need to say what's right for me. And sometimes that's still hard, right? As an adult, I hope there's a bunch of women out there listening that are like, crap, that is hard. It's hard for me. It's hard to say at my job, right? Like, I think, maybe all of you out there listening don't know, but like, I am a crier. Like, when I get like stressed about that, I have like physical manifestations of like
Jenny
nerves.
And I have had a lot of bouts of crying.
A lot of bouts of crying. And that's just like the emotional, right? And I think that's a piece of it. Like, people getting annoyed that this girl is like crying, but that's just, I'm frustrated and I'm really trying. It's hard for me to say these things, but I have to say them and it's coming out this way. Right. And so I think that's a piece of it, is the younger, like when you have younger kids, like, how do you feel? Like, how do you feel today? You feel like you can give 100%, or are you feeling like in taking that, not being mad if they feel 50%, not being mad? Like, think about these sports that if you go to school a full day and then you have practice and you get home and you have all your homework, there's so much of it. You have all this homework and you need to eat, but you also have to be social and hang out with your friends. Like, that's really hard. So
Yeah,
like
super
as
hard.
a coach, a leader of young women, saying like, yeah, you just gotta let me know. Like if you need a little break, if school's getting a little hard, let's try to like be more efficient with practice.
Right.
Right? Like what's more important also? Like, is it more important that we're physically strong or is it more important that we take 7,000 turns of a skill?
Yeah, I was
I'm
gonna
gonna say
say.
strength.
Yeah.
But that is most gymnastics, I wouldn't say most. There are a lot of gymnastics coaches though that don't understand the strength world. I did not understand any of that in my early 20s.
Yeah.
And if I could go, but that's, the joy of evolution of life, right? Is you don't know
Right. Yeah.
all of those things when you're younger. But just that little bit of if you can start to teach girls how important it is to be strong and speak up, like think about just how much better they're going to be at sport. Think about how much better they're going to be as moms, and you're going to change this whole culture. So for me, that's a piece of it. Like I hope girls get to be 30 and they still want to like invite me to their wedding,
Yeah.
and they say like, you know what, I don't think I would be like who I am if I didn't work with Jenny.
Yeah.
I hope that happens.
Yeah. Oh, I'm 100% sure it will. Yeah. I mean, I think, that's the big thing is what if we cut practice an hour short tonight so you could go and get some extra sleep? Because it looks like, we're getting run down a little bit. We need it, right?
Yep.
So let's get you out of here early, right? One of the big things, Chris and I had when we coached basketball together, and I wish, and I don't know if he'll listen to this, but he should share out his slide deck to coaches that he had before the season, because I just think it laid out stuff so well for parents and for student athletes. And, one of the big things he said is, we have a communication pattern here that goes, the student is going to come and talk to us first, and we want to get these young people comfortable with looking us in the eye and telling us what they're struggling with. And parents, we don't want you guys to come to us unless you feel like it's absolutely warranted that the kid will not come to us for some reason. But one of the cool things that happened throughout that season was you'd get kids, and of course, like they're, at first they're looking down and they're like, Coach Bennett, can I talk to you for a second? And they're real meek, and like, then it's like, look me in the eye, let's pick your chest up, say what you want to say. And they'll say what they want to say. And, I'm wondering how I could maybe get more playing time, like something like that. And immediately just like, I'm so glad that you came and asked that question. I would love to work on this with you, right?
Yeah.
And you see their demeanor change, right? Because what are they expecting? They're expecting to be, berated or put down or something
That
negative
response
to
is
come.
everything.
And I watched, Chris go through this. We had a handful of kids do it. And then the cool part was we had one of the kids later in the season come and talk to us because they said, well, I talked to Alex and he said he came and talked to you guys. And then he started, so like the other kids were telling him, well, just go and talk to the coaches. Like, have you talked to the coaches yet? And so that was one of the big like wins for us. But, again, like we talked about, and that was one of the biggest things Chris said is we are not here at all to think about, winning games or, of course, we're going to develop in our basketball skill. We're going to try to become better athletes. We're going to do all these things. But at the end of the day, like, we want your kids to learn how to communicate with authority figures and adults like adults. We want them to learn how to advocate for themselves. We want them to learn how to become grown young men who can become leaders and be positive parts of our society and stuff. And, that was first and foremost. And what was really cool is we were super lucky. Our parents were just phenomenal that whole year.
Yeah.
We didn't have any of the like nightmare parents, that would have made me not want to coach again. But, I think coaches hold so much power over that. And I think it should be one of those things like you said, your initial response, your communication, even just letting a kid, like, I talk with a lot of parents of kids who are struggling with whatever in sport, an injury, playing time, schedule, homework, you name it, right? And, I just always try to tell them, like, have they just gone and talked to the coach, or has the kid come and talk to you and just said, man, I just need a break?
Yep.
Like, I'm just so big on, like, when you start to see your kids slip like that, like, or you can feel it as an adult, like, just go and advocate for them. Pull them out of school a day early. Go and do something fun. Let them take a nap. Like, do something that is out of character, but is so clearly you advocating for the best of what's best for your kid, that it almost like shocks them back into, okay, it's not just about showing up at school on time every day. It's not just about continuing to grind through practice and grind through homework and you've got to do it because that's what your teacher said and blah, blah, blah. Like some points, you know, and I think our school system is tough because there's so many kids going through it, especially like, you know, my nephew's in Olentangy. I mean, it's 2,500 kids or something per high school. You can just so easily get lost in that. And like we've been talking about, just advocating for yourself, advocating for your own kids. And hopefully, like we've been talking about, is if we can train the young women to learn how to communicate and advocate for themselves, they can become moms who teach their kids how to advocate for themselves. And we can really start to think about how we can, you know, transition the culture a little bit, and help women and young women feel like just super confident in how they communicate with authority figures throughout their youth and into adulthood. And I know, you know, this is something we were talking about a little bit with Shelby when we were talking about birth control and just like how that conversation goes. And, you know, if your mom's in the room and a doctor's in the room, that can be a super scary conversation to be talking about. Well, we're kind of talking about sex and my mom's here and there's a doctor here and I don't know what's happening. And so I think, you know, these are things, I'm trying to get way ahead of the birth control, you know, sex conversation. But I think that those are things where it's like, you know, these are worth thinking about because they are really transformative life decisions for a lot of these young women. So, and I know you were kind of talking about that a little bit. And that's where I kind of want to go next. But I do want to talk a little bit about bulky, and because I don't think you'll talk about yourself. But you know, like Jenny said, when she first came here, she didn't have a lot of background in weightlifting.
Zero.
And so, you know, when we first started, and really all throughout your time, you know, squatting was your biggest limiting factor, your leg strength. And so you were incredibly powerful, had phenomenal overhead strength and upper body strength for pull-ups and handstand push-ups and overhead squats and snatches and catching all those things. But, you know, squatting was a limitation for you. And I mean, we had to make you squat so much.
All the time.
All the time, right? And it had to be nutrition and it had to be sleep and it had to be just squat. And all of that time, you got really lean one year, but I would never say at any moment out of all of that really, I mean, some of it was like crazy, extremely challenging European lifting programs that you were on. Did you ever really become bulky?
No.
Which is like,
No.
And so I try to tell people that all the time is like, I have had women, really good women weightlifters come through the gym and really good just female athletes generally. And I'm talking about like a professional level training regimen and super dialed in with nutrition and all these things. And like, I just really haven't seen it. Like it is so hard. I try to tell people all the time, the amount of work that I had to do to even bulk at all is always one of those things that's like, it's so much like harder than people think. So it's always interesting to me when, especially like young women who are, so take a gymnast, right? You're athletic, you're like practicing like 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right? So you're burning an unbelievable amount of calories, right? If you add weightlifting on top of that, like, and just knowing, like even just watching, you know, the way Stevie eats or the way like my nephew eats, like my nephew's trying to play defensive line right now. He's trying to bulk. And he feels like he's like force feeding himself. I'm like, it would be so hard for you to even become bulky. And the cool part about it, what I tell people all the time is like, even if you were able to accomplish it, like guess what? It's not going to be like you just wake up one day and you magically put on 20 pounds. It's going to be like 1 little pound of muscle a month at a time. If you're doing the best possible bulk ever, like maybe 1 to 1.5 pounds of muscle a month is what you can even conceivably do. So like at any point, like you could just stop.
Yeah.
And so it's so interesting to me.
Well, for all of them, it's not even, you know, for all these girls and worrying about, and women, right? I've had women here say like, oh, I don't really want to like be bulky. And you're like, okay, well, one, that takes a ton of work. So if you don't want to get bulky, you aren't going to get bulky. Two, I am confident that if you say words like that, then your nutrition would not support. I mean, you know, for me, I learned so much. Like I said, I grew up with really healthy mindset about food. And then when I was first competing, I did pretty strict paleo outside of like, you know, like protein shakes. And I was some people don't get really lean on paleo, but I was very lean. And I got, weight isn't everything because, right, you can have a lot of muscle, you can weigh more. So weight isn't everything.
Right.
But I did pay a little bit of attention to weight because I was competing in Olympic weightlifting also. So that mattered for weight classes.
Yep.
But I got down to like 132, which is very small for a competitive CrossFitter. The year I was the smallest. And we'd hit a point that I just wasn't getting stronger. And, quote unquote, clean. I was very healthy. Like Jenny eats only healthy food, right? Outside of occasional meals, but, very, very, healthy diet of nutritious, nutrient dense food. And so, I had a conversation with a CrossFit friend who did nutrition coaching, and she's like, listen, I think you should try to eat a pack of Pop-Tarts during your lifting session. And I'm like, girl, I don't eat stuff like that. Like, I eat healthy. And she's like, you don't have enough carbs to get stronger.
Yep.
And so I did. I was like, okay, I'm going to eat this pack of Pop-Tarts every time. And I probably hadn't PR'd lifts in a year and a half, and working hard. Like I was really working hard on getting stronger, and I PR'd everything within 3 months.
Yeah.
Like, so Pop-Tarts sponsor me. But I'll tell kids that sometimes, right? And that's you dealing with women and girls. Like I had a conversation just the other day with a girl who she's very small. I think she would be small anyway, but I would guess under fuels. And every time I have a gymnast, especially if they've been hurt, we talk a little bit about food because that's such a big part of getting better and healing, and are you eating enough? And her physician had even mentioned to me something about being a little concerned. And so I said, okay. And I talked to her and her mom, and I said, I'm happy to give you some different dietitians information. I want to get just a little bit, like get a feeling of like, what are you eating? And so, just real quick, like not figuring it out. Like I don't give people meal plans, but real quick, she ate 1,100 calories a day. Like that's not enough for Vivi, 1,100 calories.
Right.
And you're practicing 25 hours a week, and you're coming to lifting, and you're coming and doing PT.
Yep.
Like, and that wasn't intentional. I truly don't think this girl is like, oh, I shouldn't eat. But like, you just don't understand, one, what food does, like what it needs to do for your body.
Right.
Two, I know a lot of girls and their families and their coaches that are so diligent about, good food or healthy food and I get it. You don't want to tell your kid, go eat a bunch of candy or you should eat a Pop-Tart. Like I understand that. But at the same time, like you need so many carbs to get through practices like that really having some things like that is beneficial, and it's teaching them to be healthier about food, right? I mean, there's two pros is, do we want to eat crazy sugar and whipped cream and eat candy all day and French fries? No, but I think, one, like this day of food was like extremely, like it was 39 grams of protein.
Yeah.
And it was like 110 grams of carbs, and it was a little bit high fat just based on I never even talked about that stuff, but I just said, girl, you got to get more food in. Like, this is my recommendation. Like I took her exact day of eating, and I just said in breakfast, I just add this. And I get it. You don't like these things. Like I get meat texture is really hard for people. I know I deal with that, but sometimes if you care about being healthy and you care about being good at whatever sport you do, then you have to eat, and you have to, you might not even be hungry.
It's a limiting factor at a certain
It's
point.
a limiting factor. And I think, like I said, a big thing for girls is I want to feel lighter, right? When you play certain things, I don't want to feel heavy. Well, you're going to feel heavy if your body isn't fueled. Like that's actually going to make you feel worse. I asked a bunch of girls, I told you this, a bunch of girls this week, if they had any stories. Like, hey, what kind of things do you think, you girls that come work with me, I feel like are all on the path to caring about weightlifting and wanting to be strong. Do you have any stories? And a couple of them were like, oh yeah, like a bunch of girls won't eat the week of homecoming or hardly eat anything the week of homecoming because they want to look good in their dress. And I'm like, goodness gracious. Like, I just don't, and that's just knowledge. That's knowledge. It's what you've learned from other people. It's even like, okay, so you, teenage girl who's telling me this story, did you say, that's dumb?
Yeah.
Like, why are you doing that? That's so unhealthy. Yeah. It's not going to make you look different. You're just going to feel like crap. You're basically slowing your metabolism down. So now it's actually going to be harder to look the way you want to look. Like some of it could just be factual. Right. And so, but that's hard. It's also hard to, it's hard to stand up to your friends. It's hard to do those things. So you were talking about me and bulking and lifting. And so I told the story about the Pop-Tarts. I even think, right, like getting out of college and not doing gymnastics. I talk with a lot of college gymnasts who, they get out of lifting and it's like, or out of their college sport. And it's like, well, how do I work out now? And I think that's a big problem with women too. Like, how do you work out? You do Pilates? I mean, yes, you can do Pilates. Like, I'm not trying to knock on Pilates. I actually love Pilates, but I think that that's such like the path that people take is like yoga and Pilates. And like, I don't know, maybe you can have a goal of doing a pose but I think that going from being an athlete, like it's fine if you want to do some Pilates, it's fine if you want to run some, but I think so many of them sink into the like, I don't want to have this athlete body, which like, I promise you, if you're 22 or 23 and you're listening to this, in like 10 years, gonna be like, man, I remember taking a picture. One of the driving factors actually in, this probably will be very meaningful to adult women listening. One of the driving factors for me in that year, I was like, I need to make some changes, right? I had gone to Washington, D.C., and I was with a friend, and she had a baby. I was holding the baby, and I looked at my picture, and I thought, I really hate how my arm looks, right? I have like no shoulder definition. Like, and that wasn't me. Like, that just wasn't how I looked as far as what I thought about how I looked. And I remember very much, and going back and telling the physical therapist assistant that I worked with at the time, I was like, so this year I'm going to get my delts back. Like, that was a goal because it actually looks better. You know what? No muscle actually looks really bad.
Yeah, right.
So, and that was a part of that journey of, okay, something needs to change in the next year that prompted I need to do more for myself. I need to work out more. I think I'm going to compete in CrossFit. So clearly I went a completely different direction as far as not wanting to lift. Because then the goal became, how much can I lift? Which is a huge sway. One of my favorite things to see in women, adult women here, and also the teenage girls. I can think of one specific girl who has come to lifting for a long time. She's actually one of my oldest clients. Like, she, not oldest age-wise, but been with me the longest. Because was at Children's with me and came here. And she's very consistent with lifting. And always like puts the 10s or 15s on. And I try very hard to not push weight early because, one, I want your technique to be great. And two, I want you to come. Yeah. And I know if you're just here for a little while, you're gonna decide. But if I push it too soon, you're gonna be uncomfortable. And I probably didn't push her weight for a year and a half, a long time of letting her like lift way less weight than she could. And one day this summer, she like squatted 155 pounds. And that's way over her body weight. And I was like, yes, like that is what I want. I want you to realize like this is really cool to feel strong. Yeah. Like making goals is really cool. And that happens with women here too, right? We come in and it's like, you're so comfortable grabbing the 10s or 15s because you can do it. So I think, like coming in and like failing, like try a weight and not be able to do it. So technique always comes first, right? Yep. You're someone listening and you're like, oh, maybe I should work out more. Like you're 30 or 40 or 50 and you're like, oh man, this is like hitting. Like I feel this. Like I don't like to look at my arm in the mirror, right? I've seen a picture like that. Like you come in and you get comfortable with the movement. Like you work with a coach and I think that's really helpful. I think it's hard to do on your own, right? Especially new, if you have never lifted. Like I remember going in the gym, like Urban Active and being like, okay, maybe I'll lift some weights. And then I was like, I guess I know how to do bicep curls. Yeah, like it was just, I don't know what to do. Like free weights were so intimidating. My first CrossFit class here, Tom coached and it was snatching. And I was like, come stand right by me. Like I don't want to do it wrong. Yeah. And two, it's a little bit scary. Come stand right here. Yeah. And so like, I know what that feels like to be intimidated. And I think that ultimately, if you, one, aren't happy with how you look, you're not happy with how you feel, you're not happy with how your clothes fit. We all go through that at one point. I've been through it multiple times in my life. You have to say, okay, then what do I want to change about this? How am I going to go about it? Whether I'm old or I'm young, like, how am I going to get better at my sport? How am I going to get better at my life? How am I going to be a happier person? How am I going to be a better mom? And I'm going to take these steps and they can be incremental, but I'm going to do something. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to be more intentional with my food. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to decide how am I going to fitness? And I'm going to tell you, like, man, it is not a natural inclination for women to be like, I think I'm going to go lift heavy weights. Yeah. But I've done a lot of different fitness in my life and that is the answer.
Well, and I'll tell you the other thing that I am so in love with, and it's one of the things, like Maria and I talk about this a lot, and I have never in my history ever seen one of the kids like watching their moms work out or be here and watching them compete and do generations or masters and be like, wow, my mom looks so skinny. They all are like, look how strong my mom is, and they like get so excited when they hit a PR, when they're lifting weights and they get to see their mom doing something that's pushing themselves to be strong. That changes something in a kid. It's one thing if your dad does it and you see when the men's things are going, I don't know, there's just this like, oh yeah, like my dad's strong, I kind of knew that. Like, oh, he throws weights around, whatever. man, when even young boys, when they watch their moms do it, it really, like, you can actually watch the kids' eyes go like, wow, like, I didn't know my mom could do that.
That's the shift that has to happen, even in like for a woman's brain, right? Like the shift. What prompted me to want to do it was I don't like how my arm looks, and it has to become what can my body do.
Right.
So I think that that's one of the big things that getting into weightlifting does is it starts to shift your focus on how do I look to how can I perform and what can I do and what goals can I set. And almost the aesthetic piece of it becomes nothing.
Yeah,
like
fades away.
I would say in that time, like obviously competing is a little bit different, but during that time, that was no thought of mine. Like I never had a thought of how do I look, because all of my focus was on like, look at this cool stuff I'm learning to do. Like, look how exciting it was. The first time I squatted front squat 175 pounds was like amazing.
Yeah.
Like, I just think that is such, and that's going to be whether you're old or young, like figuring out that your body is capable of really cool things. And I just think it's so empowering and such a surprise for some people. But if you're not willing, one, to ever pick up the weight in the first place, and two, you're never willing to try something heavier, you're never going to even have that feeling. You're probably going to continue to be a little bit focused on how do I look. And I think being able to shift it to how do I perform and what is my body capable of is such a powerful thing.
Which the cool part about that is once you fast forward to when you're in your 60s or 70s, that's all it is. I mean, if you talk to, my mom or Maggie or anybody in that age range that's been here for a little bit, they'll all tell you like, I really don't give a shit, for the most part, what I look like. I care about how are my blood tests, what can I still do, how am I getting off the floor with my grandkids, like that type of stuff. That's all they care about is just pure performance. One of the coolest things that I've been super excited about, and this has been true, you were a gigantic leader in this. Friendship's funny because for me, we started with 4 guys. Right? A lot of the first people who joined were friends and family.
Yes.
We were probably for the first year, which you probably joined like right when we were about a year, right? We were predominantly male. We were probably like 70% male, 30% female. There were not like a lot of females. The females we did have were badasses, were awesome. It was, Lisa and Maggie and then Kelly and Nicole. And like there were a bunch of different people who were hard workers, right? But then sort of that next, phase when we started to, maybe push competing a little bit more. And, it was you, and it was Kristen, it was Dawn, and Nasa, and Maria, and Lisa, and all these different people. And, like, we started to get to this point where, like, the guy clients specifically could not keep up with the females. And it was kind of spread out. Like, you were morning at that time. There were some people, like, Lisa would come in the evenings, and it was kind of like we would do these little male-female competitions, and sometimes like we would even do, I remember when we did death by thruster at the same weight, and Lisa and Kit went like head-to-head at the same weight, and Jay and I were like, dude, this is like, the girls are kicking the shit out of the guys in this today. And for me, when I first started coaching, I was a little bit uncomfortable coaching females, and I've kind of talked about that. My past was just very male-centric, being in the infantry and stuff, like you're just not around women. And so at first, I wasn't quite sure how to deal with, female athletes crying. Like, I think probably the first time you cried around me, I was like, I know Jay's got fantastic stories about that. Jay was like, I'm uncomfortable, I gotta go. But what I started to find was that the female athletes who had come to the side of, I want to focus on performance, I don't want to focus on aesthetics, they were actually more receptive to my coaching. They were more fun for me to work with, and the culture that all of you guys created for the women who came after, like I try to tell the women who join now, like you see all these, now we're 65% women, weightlifting and build. And you start to watch that, and I'm just like, you guys are a part of this culture, and the reason that this culture exists full of incredibly strong women is a huge part of what like all of you guys built back then. And it's just so cool. And now we get to do it with our daughters, and we get to do it with these young gymnasts, and it's just been really cool to watch that progression over years happen. And see some of the girls who's like, Julia Cassis, see some of the girls who started with us in like our very early youth program continue to still, weightlift and work out and do those things. So that for me has been one of the coolest parts of this experience of like owning friendship for me. And I always hope that people, when they show up and they're a part of it and they're newer, if you're listening to this and you're in your first year, your first 2 years, and you look around, you just see a bunch of strong ass women ripping barbells off the ground. Like that didn't just happen.
Right.
It really is because of what you guys did at that time. I'm super thankful for it. And now I'm more thankful for it than ever because of, Stevie
Having
and watching Stevie and
yeah.
Vivi, come in and watch Avery do heavy grace and watch Lindsay do a mind-blowing 116 grace, and just have them like watching. And right now they're just soaking it in, right?
Well, the goal for that for me is because, Vivian comes a lot during Teen Girl Lift is just like, that's just what girls do.
Yeah, exactly.
Guess what? That's just what girls do. Yeah. Girls lift weights and they work out hard and they care about being strong and they share their opinions and they have fun doing it. Yep. And I think that, that for me is something that I hope they just start to feel like that's normal. Like that is what girls do. I mean, there's still a ton of girls who, I'll say like, oh, like bring this friend or a couple of gymnasts that I'd love to come, and they're real timid about it. And I don't have a perfect answer. They don't say, I don't want to lift weights. I don't want to get bullied. They don't say that, but there has to be a hesitation. So I hope just by sharing more stories and sharing what girls do and girls getting excited when they lift more, there are a few times I have been more excited than watching a couple of those girls squat like 155. So then I was like, do you guys think it'd be fun if I made like stickers or t-shirts you get, like a 200 club? Like what if you squatted 200 pounds? Like trying to put that in their little brains that like, wow, I could do something like that. Yeah. And I just, it's exciting to watch. It's exciting to see them start to enjoy their strength and appreciate it and cheer for each other and want to bring friends in and get excited to come and get up early in the summer or give up their extra time because one, it is making them better, but I think they really enjoy it too. And I will say that in all of my fitness endeavors, nothing was more exciting or more empowering than realizing I could lift heavy weight.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's the culture of heavy weightlifting. I think, like you said, it carries over into persona.
Yes.
I mean, and maybe this is a reach, you can tell me if it wasn't, but I honestly think if you didn't do the grind, the strength training work and push yourself to a place where you got beyond, you like got to a point where you believed in yourself, your strength, your performance, because of the work you had put in. So when you showed up to nationals weightlifting, you knew I have put in the work.
For sure.
Like, I'm ready. I think that changed fundamentally who you are and gave you a lot of the strength and the confidence to go to leave a children's and to start your own business.
Yeah, I would agree.
And I think those are things where, that's, again, like we're talking right now about the physical and what it can give the girls, but that strength and confidence and trust in yourself, I think it carries over so much into who you are and the belief that you have in yourself.
Very much.
That, they can hopefully, become gymnastics coaches and change, and continue to work to change the culture and, maybe eventually become a coach, at a facility like this where it's like, hey, I want to run the girls. Like, I mean, Bailey was a gymnast.
Yep.
She teaches our little kids now. And I mean, she loves it. And I think she loves working with all the kids, right? But you just see there's just something different about when you get young women in there.
I have 5 or 6 kids that like, I want to be a PT.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, well, what kind of PT do you want to do? Well, I want to do what you do.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, you graduate PT school. We'll just grow Built by Borda. We'll put little Built by Bordas and we can have this whole, we don't have to call it by Borda anymore if there's a whole bunch of people. But I love that thought of like, you want to help empower people and you want to make people healthier. And to your point about, I guess my shirt kind of says it, right? You can do hard things.
Yeah.
Like, and by doing hard things, you get better at doing hard things.
Yep.
And hard things is, deciding you want to lift weights. It's deciding to put more weight on the bar. It's telling friends you can't do things or don't want to do things that you don't feel is right for your body. It's speaking up for yourself. Like hard things isn't just one thing. There's a lot of things in life that are hard. And if you never choose to take that path that's a little harder decision, you 100% won't become your best self.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a good spot to wrap it. But, I think people who are listening, I think I'm such a big believer in mentors and surrounding myself with people who I feel like are helping bring things forward from a culture perspective, and watching your impact on these young women. And I mean, I tell everybody I can, like when I listen to you on podcasts, when I do that stuff, like I don't know if it's weird to say I'm proud of you, but it is just the coolest thing. I mean, it is really amazing.
Nice to have people proud of you.
Yeah, it is amazing to watch, and it's super inspiring. It makes me want to be better and do more. And I hope that people can appreciate and understand how important it is. Thank you. I appreciate your time for being on the
and I'll end
podcast.
with, how you look is honestly the least exciting thing about who you are.
Yeah, I love that. All right. Well, hopefully Stevie and Vivi can listen to this in 10 years.
Perfect.
And listen to
Give
us.
it a share. Share this with a woman or a girl that you think it would help.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Thanks, guys.